We have been using soil blocks for a long time to start our seeds, but the problem with the traditional soil block recipes is they often have peat moss, and peat moss is really a not sustainable resource. You have to basically destroy an ecosystem to be able to harvest the peat. Hi guys, welcome back to Part-Time Permies. The point of using peat moss in soil blocks is it does help two things. It helps retain moisture in them, but it also helps hold those soil blocks together. A lot of people have switched over to coconut coir or coconut coir. That basically is another fibrous material that you can use that pretty much does pretty well at the same thing. But again, we're in Michigan. Where does coconut grow? Anywhere near us? Nowhere. It's down south where it's more tropical. So that's not very sustainable either, having to ship that all the way up here and then purchase that from off property all the time. So I have also heard of people using wool pellets. We don't have any sheep on property. Purchase that, it can be expensive. So we're going to try something that we've produced on property and just see how it works. What we have is a compost that was made out of pine wood chips and chicken waste. It was hot compost to begin with, and then has been sitting around for 2 years and continuously breaking down. And I sifted all the larger pieces out of this, and it gives this fibrous compost. So we're actually going to try this in our mix and hope that it provides some of the same things as your peat moss would otherwise do. We're going to see if this combination will work. If I'm directly replacing the peat moss with this fibrous compost, it's going to be 3 quarts of this compost along with 3 quarts of just my chicken compost, which is very sandy because that's what our soil is in this area. You also have 1 quart of vermiculite or perlite or a coarse sand that you put in here. The fertilizer mix, you really only use about 1/3 of a cup. The fertilizer mix is 1 part green sand to 1 part blood meal to 1 part phosphate. This is small scale for your homestead, smaller gardens. If you're doing this on a farm scale, you'll want to mix a lot more of this at a time. Since our sandy area is a beach sand fine, I do add the vermiculite or perlite. The other thing with switching out my compost instead of the peat is I don't have to add lime to neutralize it. Peat is acidic, so you want to add some lime to neutralize that so you're not affecting the pH of your starting soil. So you want to mix all this material together, and then you add water to it until it's fairly saturated. You want to be able to pick that up and squeeze out a few drops of that water. I'd rather have it a little too wet than too dry, because if it's too dry, it'll just crumble and fall apart. I want it to basically be able to hold together in a mass when compressed. So this is a small hand soil blocker. I do have the square plugs in here, and that's because there is another size. This mini blocker is 3/4 inch soil blocks. That actually fits directly into the plugs that are in the bigger size. The biggest advantage to that is that when your plant gets big enough, if you're using a smaller one, if it's outgrowing its space, you just take that plug and set it in the bigger one. That's all you do to up pot. And once those roots touch the soil from the soil block around it, it'll start moving into that. So as you take them and you push them into the soil to compress it, pull up on the handle, it'll push the bottoms out of the block. I could fit about 9 of these rows of soil blocks in each of my trays. The trays I have, I really like the 1020 heavy duty trays. I find anything else just falls apart really fast. I get mine at Bootstrap Farmer. I'll have a link in the description below. But for soil blocks, I use a mesh tray set inside a solid bottom tray because I want to bottom water these plants. And if you water directly into the tray where you have a soil block, it'll erode the sides of the soil block. The longer you have them in blocks and not in the ground, the more soil will start falling apart from around these plants. So if you bottom water them, so basically you pull that inside tray up a little bit and put the water underneath, and then set it back down, and soil blocks will absorb the water from the bottom. Then you're not eroding the soil blocks, and it's actually better for the plants to not get that water on its leaves, watering from the top. What I typically do is just take a little bit of the soil from the lip around this block and push it over the seeds and just tap it down a little bit. So you can start seeds this way. You can transplant seeds from your paper towel method this way. I usually just start seeds this way, but I'm playing around with some other methods this year. These soil blocks were made with peat moss, and they do hold together fairly well. They do crumble a little bit, especially if you don't water underneath them. These plants are doing pretty well. So they were started and germinated on paper towel method and then transplanted into these soil blocks. But to compare these to the soil blocks where I use my wood compost, I'd actually say the wood compost holds together better than this, but these hold the moisture better. You either have this softer material that's holding water, kind of more like a sponge with coconut coir or with the peat moss, or you use stuff you have on property, which is more sustainable, and you might have to water those plants more often. All in all, I would say it's actually cheaper and still functional to not use the peat moss or coconut coir. Is it ideal? Maybe not, in that you do have to water them more, but the plants seem to be doing fine. So we'll keep going with that and maybe switching our methods over to more sustainable process for these soil blocks. We do have a video coming up here, which I'll link as soon as it's posted, that is going to be comparing the soil block method to the paper towel method, to container method, or direct seeding, and just kind of the benefits and limitations of each one, when you might want to use each one. So click here if you want to see that video, and we will see you with our next one.